Yeah, excellent. So welcome to the webinar for launching the report of harnessing the role of the private sector in waste management through South-South and Triangular Cooperation for Inclusive Urbanization. It's also kicking off the UND for South-South Cooperation. My name is Johannes Samlan Bowling. I'm the UNDP Private Sector Specialist leading the South-South and Triangular Cooperation Portfolio at ICPSD, which is the Istanbul International Center for Private Sector in Development. Now, this is a joint webinar, as the report was conducted as a collaboration between South-South and Triangular Cooperation Department HQ. We have Juliana who'll be providing some opening remarks briefly, and also ICPSD. So, we have a pretty incredible lineup of practitioners, technical experts from across the range of fields, and also innovative finance, waste management, and South-South specialists. So I would like to begin by providing the floor to Gulçin Salingan, who is the Deputy Director for ICPSD, for some opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Johannes. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining this webinar. Today on UN South-South Cooperation Day, we are excited to launch the report on harnessing the role of private sector in waste management through South-South and Triangular Cooperation for Inclusive Urbanization. Considering that this year's theme is focused on solidarity, equity, and partnership by drawing initiatives from UN, civil society, and private sector, we think that the launch of this report is very timely, as it presents the findings for the successful private sector initiatives in 12 different countries in the Global South for waste management. The report, as my colleague Johannes already mentioned, was led by Istanbul International Center for Private Sector in Development, the Global Center of UNDP, with a mandate to leverage the role of private sector in development. The center has been working on private sector engagement through South-South cooperation for sustainable development goals since its establishment in 2011. South-South and Triangular Cooperation enrich and diversify the development efforts through a variety of flexible cooperation modalities, such as knowledge exchanges, technology transfers, mutual learning, peer-to-peer support, and innovative financing. Leading the private sector strategy of UNDP, our center supports private sector by promoting best practices of private sector, by acknowledging businesses has a major role to play in the pursuit of Agenda 2030. Of course, due to their strengths in terms of growth, job creation, innovative capacity, in addition to their financial and technical resources. Promoting inclusive business models is another way to centers supporting private sector engagement in development, where we engage low-income communities in their value chain as suppliers, distributors, retailers, and sometimes customers, while providing solutions to global challenges. The center has been focusing on inclusive urbanization recently by providing technical assistance, capacity building activities, and building multi-stakeholder partnerships to engage businesses in leveraging sustainable, inclusive, and resilient cities. This research is actually part of these efforts, and I would like to thank all of the authors, contributors, panelists for contributing this report. We would like to especially thank the South-South Cooperation team for a very rich collaboration in creating the initiatives and conducting this research. Today, we look forward to hearing the findings and the learnings from the wide range of experts on this panel. Thank you. Over to you, Johannes.
Thank you so much, Gulçin Hanım, for taking time out of your schedule for these opening remarks. I would like to then go directly to Juliana, who is the policy specialist on South-South and Triangular Cooperation and lead for the UNDP portfolio of SSTC. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Johannes, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all. Welcome and happy United Nations Day for South-South Cooperation. It's a pleasure for me to be here today together to celebrate this important day. As many of you know, the United Nations celebrates 12th September of every year as the International Day for South-South Cooperation. And this is done in order to celebrate the achievements, but also to raise awareness about the power of the solutions developed by the Global South, in a way to change the mindset and think about the Global South, not only as a traditional recipient of cooperation, but mainly as a provider of cooperation, as the Global South in a position to share their knowledge, their expertise, and their successful good practices with other developing countries for an increased impact in sustainable development. This is why in UNDP, we started a tradition a few years ago to celebrate the United Nations Day for South-South Cooperation, also to showcase how UNDP supports South-South cooperation and the joint work that we do with many partners across the globe. And this is fully aligned with UNDP's strategic plan 2022-2025, which specifically considers South-South and triangular cooperation as integral to how UNDP thinks and understands the future of development. The strategic plan says that UNDP connects countries and applies their knowledge and experiences to advance sustainable development. And of course, this is done in collaboration with partners. So that's why we are proud to be here today launching this joint report, harnessing the role of the private sector in waste management through South-South cooperation for inclusive urbanization. The joint report was jointly developed by the UNDP Istanbul Center for Private Sector in Development and the UNDP South-Southern Triangular Cooperation team, under the leadership of the UNDP Istanbul Center for Private Sector in Development. This joint report is a great milestone for all of us. We've been working on it for a very long time. And we wanted to touch upon a very big challenge for cities, not only of the Global South, but also from the Global North, which is waste management. But we wanted to say that despite the challenges and despite the topic being a very crucial and very difficult topic for many cities, there are successful experiences. The Global South was able to come up with successful practices, and these good practices can be upscaled through South-South cooperation for the benefit of other countries and other cities, because these other cities can learn from and can replicate or adapt the learning into their own territories. And we wanted to specifically highlight that these good practices that we identified throughout the report are led or are supported by the private sector. I want to highlight that the report is evidence-based research. A lot of research was conducted, but we wanted to highlight the role of the private sector because this is fully aligned with several global frameworks that specifically highlight the role of the private sector in South-South and triangular cooperation for advancing sustainable development. Just to name some of these frameworks, because it will be impossible to cover them all, but just to give you an idea, the second United Nations High-Level Conference on South-South Cooperation in 2019 specifically mentions that South-Southern Triangular Cooperation is no longer only government to government, which is basically the traditional approach to South-South cooperation, but is increasingly engaging a variety of diverse actors and development partners for increasing the impact of South-South cooperation. And among others, the conference and the outcome report of the conference mentions the role of the private sector, because the private sector can bring innovative financing to developing countries. The private sector can bring additional resources, and I'm not talking only about financial resources, but also about technologies and other resources and expertise that can make that South-South more impactful in developing countries and for developing countries. In the same line, also the report of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation, the one in 2021 and the one in 2023, specifically highlights the role of the private sector as a key stakeholder to work with and encourages the UN to establish partnerships with the private sector for supporting South-South and triangular cooperation. So our work is fully aligned with these global frameworks. And more specifically, I would like to highlight only one of the several global frameworks, which is the latest version available of the report of the United Nations Secretary General on the status of South-South cooperation in 2022, which is the latest version available, which specifically mentions the UNDP Istanbul Center for Private Sector in Development, highlighting and recognizing the great work that the center does in promoting South-South with the support of the private sector. The report of the United Nations Secretary General specifically says, and I will read this part, specifically says that the Istanbul Center for Private Sector in Development supports companies in tailoring their business models to respond to sustainable development needs. And the center does this by identifying and promoting best practices within the framework of South-South cooperation. So with that, we really hope that the report is inspiring, and we really hope that the webinar that we are having today to launch this report sheds light about the power of Southern-led solutions for advancing sustainable development. I wish us all a very fruitful discussion, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliana, for that comprehensive overview and the background, the South-South cooperation. So I would like to, let's get straight into the substantive points of some of the findings of the report. And I would like to introduce Aslihan Al-Bustan, who is an engineer by background with a PhD in renewable energy, previously a university lecturer in the infrastructure, waste, and energy management, but also currently the technical specialist on energy and private sector finance within UNDP Afghanistan, previously leading the South-South Cooperation Portfolio, ICPSD, and now joining the webinar as a co-author of the report. So Aslihan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Johannes. Thank you so much. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the beautiful people of the South and the North globally, and happy UN South-South and Triangular Cooperation Day. If I may, I will share my screen with you to give you a better understanding with the visualizing our outcomes and why we did this report. First of all, before starting my words, I would like to thank you, IICPSD. We have long time relations with them. Working with them was very, we built really not IICPS is like a home to me. So now the Johannes is leading the South-South and Triangular Cooperation with successfully. I would like to say again, hello and thank you to Gülçin Hanım and Johannes, and also highlight the importance of the Juliana's support during this report, as we have some regularly meetings to talk about. So this report is an outcome of the collaboration and cooperation of many people. So the report's name is long, and then saying harnessing the role of private sector, South-South cooperation, inclusive urbanization. It seems to be like talking about many things, but in short, they all have a common point. The waste management is, the waste production is an outcome of the human activity, which the human population totally related with the human population, because the amount of the waste is calculated by per capita of the country, how much kilogram of waste that the persons produce. So the rate of urbanization is totally affects the production of waste. And the urbanization rate is highly concentrated in the high levels in the global South countries. So these countries have rates of the high rates of urbanization, and then the cities are expanding, and there is a need for waste management, and there are other actors to be included in the waste management ecosystem, which is also the private sector. So what we focused on this report is identify some good practices of the private sector through South-South Triangular Cooperation, where the private sectors are focusing on the cities which have high rate of urbanization, and then we also examined their work in the content of development and if they can be replicated and scaled up in the global south. So these are the countries that we focused on, and although we say the global south, we were not able to touch up on all the countries, but we identified some good practices of the countries that you can see on the map. So our focus was like diversification of the countries from the other continents, like Latin America, Northern Africa, and Central Asia and Asia Pacific. And then we focused on, with the research team, focused on the cities, because the waste is produced in the cities, mostly in the cities where the urbanization rate is high and the people mostly concentrated in the cities. And the activities in the cities, like what we do during the day, is producing more waste. I mean, we city people as urbaners produce more waste than the rural people. So this is the fact. So focusing on the cities and identifying the city's challenges and the solutions would make more sense to be included in the report. And how we selected the countries and then put in the report is like, first we started with the international climate agreements such as Paris Agreement, Kyoto Agreement, and other waste-relevant international agreements like Basel Convention, Kigali Amendment, and others. And as well as with the Paris Agreement, which is the main, highlight leading guidance of this climate action, where the waste management is a part of the climate action. We also made a research about the national determined contributions, NDCs of the countries, if they prioritize the waste management or not, or if they have some commitments to improve their waste management capacity or not. And then we also looked into the alternative green financing instruments, which will be discussed in the further panels as well, which is highly important because in the green frameworks and the green bonds, or if you take it from the conventional side or the Islamic side, the green financing instruments mostly focus on a framework where this framework also highlights the importance of waste management. And renewable energy, waste management, wastewater are all recognized in the framework. So if there is an alternative green financing ecosystem enabled, so we also highlighted that point of the countries that if private sector wants to make more investment or mobilize more resources.
Apologies,
so
I'm
yes.
interrupting just to give you a minute left on the timing. So.
Okay, so in short, you will go through the report. This is our methodology. What I will just cover that what we finalize is in Argentina, for instance, a state-owned company just producing waste to energy by using the green bonds. And in Bahrain, there is an ecosystem for all the waste to energy companies to come and use the bonds frameworks. In Turkey, a waste management company is also dealing with the waste management, and by the way, they can use it. They're using the green framework of the country to issue green sukuk. And in Indonesia, which is a leading country of the issuing the first green sukuk, for sovereign green sukuk, the waste companies are working on it. And what we concluded is from the companies, the private sector not only doing the technical side of waste collecting and then managing with waste, but also they further just leading some capacity building and public awareness raising programs, as well as giving training programs to the other companies. I hope you enjoy the report, reading it, and you can share my email, Johannes. If anyone wants to have a further question, I'll be ready to support and respond. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aslihan, for all of the efforts and the work and research that's gone into the report and your very comprehensive presentation. I would like to, I'm being slightly wary of the time, so I wouldn't like to take up too much more space. So I would like to introduce Yunus Sharifli, who is the South-South and Triangle Cooperation researcher. Has specialized in foreign policy with a distinct focus on energy and infrastructure issues. So, Yunus, feel free, the floor is yours.
Hello, dear colleague and participants. I hope that you hear me and see my screen. So I would like to say thank you very much for Ms. Aslan for her great presentation. I would like to draw your attention in two important factors in this presentation. After we conducted extensive interview with private sector stakeholders, we identify two important trends in the global South countries. The first is about common challenges. The second is about private sector-led good practices. I would like to start first with the common challenges, which is important to understand what's the main problem in the global South countries on waste management sector. The first challenges I would like to emphasize about informal workforce. Due to the lack of work opportunities, low wage, and unsystematic approach to waste management sectors, the majority of workers based on the informal workforce, which create challenges for both local governments and private sector, because informal work mostly based on the random work, but private sector companies work mostly based on systematic and formal work. The second challenges we found in our reports about the lack of legal frameworks and regulations, the lack of categorization of municipal solid waste, the lack of specific rules and regulation on waste management create confusion and create challenges for private sector companies to enter global South countries market. The third important challenges is about municipal budget constraint. The lack of funding of municipality create disinterest to invest waste management sector in the global South countries. And fourth and most important common challenges was about limited participation of private sector, which mostly based on above mentioned challenges. However, our report shows that despite limited participation of private sector companies, we identify a range of companies in our case studies that these private companies apply different solutions and different strategies on waste management sector. First, I would like to emphasize the digital solutions, because private sector companies tend to use digital technologies, digital solutions through the waste management process. The first examples come from Gringo application in Indonesia. The second is Vinim application in Argentina. The Gringo enables users to photograph. Gringo enables users to take photo of waste and learn their market value, which is efficiently helped people to understand the waste management importance. The second application is Vinim application, which provides the platform for both large food producers and smaller retailers to effectively market their excess products at substantial discount, which help to people and retailers to reduce the food waste. The second important good practice from private sector company is about community-based engagement. For example, Waste for Change company in Indonesia organized 3-hour school aims to heighten public awareness of proper waste management practice. The second company, Interactive Çevre from Turkey, also organized trainings, educational forums, and schools on waste management for both officials and the public for increase their information and explain people that why waste management practice is important. And the final and most important private sector-led good practice about circular economy, because private sector companies also provide incentive to country transit to circular economy. First company is Geocycle company in Morocco, and second the Suez company in Thailand. Geocycle Morocco utilize household waste through waste treatment process and generates solid recovered fuel. The Suez company also transforms plastic packaging waste into premium grade post-consumer recycled plastics and generating high quality second materials. Overall, our research shows that private sector companies not only involve waste picking and waste collection in the global South countries, but they also create strong spillover effect from applying digital technologies to community-based engagement, also create strong incentive to transit to circular economy. As a result of which, our research shows that more systematic efforts and more incentive can help the global South countries to promote private sector companies to enter market and create sustainable waste management system and sector in the global South countries. This is my the last presentation. I would like to say thank you for both ICPC and CCTC for their support. Over to you, Johannes.
Thank you very much, Yunus, for the excellent presentation. And so maybe just to also to bring in some points to complement. So I think especially we're doing ICPSD, we're promoting private sector initiatives, especially elements of sustainable finance, digital innovation, circular economy that can really reduce costs of governments or costs for governments and municipalities. And with the perspective that how can we get the private sector to fund or contribute towards the SDGs? Now, at the same time, it's also important to stress, as we're always advocating for private sector initiatives, there is a strong direction also needed to regulate let's say private sector regulation, where we have to rely on governments and authorities to formalize and protect particular elements of the private sector. So, for example, we have across a very good trend across countries of the waste pickers, and most of whom are informal, low income, and essentially vulnerable populations, but at the same time contributing tremendously to, put it simply, cleaning up the streets, right? So, for example, you have a really good case in Colombia where the Constitutional Court ruled to incorporate waste pickers in, let's say, the more formal waste management system, essentially protecting their employment rights and creating the rewarding essentially a particular form of employment that contributes to the SDGs. Now, I would like to start then going into the panel, and my first. So we have, as I've said, we are very fortunate to have a real depth of expertise with us. Our first panelist, Vane Vikvist, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, Vane, who has, is an international national profile policymaker on waste policy management, has an extensive knowledge on technical infrastructure and legal framework, currently a part-time advisor for whom he was previously the managing director for Afvalsvej, and also a lecturer and extensive, let's say, academic on circular economy and other forms of waste management economics. So, Vane, I would like to hand over for your 5-minute introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me, and thank you for being invited to this very interesting webinar, and thank you also for preparing this report. I wanted to be very short. First of all, I am representing the Swedish Waste Management Association, Avfallsverige, and we are primarily representing all the public entities in Sweden in the field of waste management and recycling, but we also compile a great number of associated private members as well. We also have an cooperation with UNDP, since we have a memorandum of understanding with the UNDP in the field of waste management. We also will launch next week or so a new e-learning facility specifically for decision makers in developing countries, and we will also set up together with UNDP, probably next year, a kind of a clearinghouse within the frame of waste management and circular economy and so on. So that was a very short background. Now to this report, I find it a very valuable contribution. I see the report as an inspiration not only between the South and South, but actually also from the South to the North, because I believe that also North can learn from these experiences that are presented in the report. On the other hand, I wanted to point out that, of course, the basic problems that we can notify in the report concerning not enough collection efficiency, dump sites and everything like that always seems to prevail. And this depends very much on the lack of implementation in reality. We know that there is still already a lot of legislation and many more reports, but it's lacking implementation in the reality. One of the very interesting, I think, key learning from this report is to how to integrate the informal sector. So I will give the recommendation to the UNDP to work more on that, more in specific, to try to understand how can that be done in reality and how can that be replicated also in other countries. As said by the previous speaker, we also can notify some very interesting startup and intelligent solutions. And also the role of planning, of course, is crucial. And it's also the idea concerning the overall objectives regarding, for example, zero waste provisions. But there are some interesting some obstacles. We have to conclude that some of the presented projects are quite small, and we don't know what happened when we scale them up, except for the well-known PPP solutions presented, like the incineration plant in Bahrain, for example. And we also know that it might be not that easy to replicate from one country to another because of legal difficulties and so on. And we also can see that it seems to be a very good and large need for external funding, and that the municipalities and other, also private companies, seems not really to be sustainable yet. Also, we have to consider that private suppliers, we already have a lot of them within technology suppliers and knowledge providers. And when it comes to different kinds of private constitutions like in-house and outsource or PPP, one have to make a very careful investigation what is really the best path in the unique situation, and it can be very difficult to make this as a silver bullet solution. I don't think there is a silver bullet solution. So we have to regard the different diseases from one place to another because of a number of different constitutions. My final word was about that I heard about the name was named the Secretary General, and you know, Mr. Guterres, he used to say that the globe is burning, or it's boiling, more or less. So I constitute that the climate crisis is very, very much there. And therefore, I would ask, and I was a little bit confused that not much more of the efforts concerning the different projects were attaching to the idea of climate mitigation. Thank you so far.
Thank you so much, Ben, for an excellent and very, very deep insights into waste management. To kind of to pivot then to Jan, I would like to introduce so Jan Atajic, who is the founder of the impact or ESG investment firm Athelina Impact Investments, with experience from the World Bank and other investment banks. Jan is also an advocate and some pioneer of impact investment mechanisms that solve social and environmental problems through structure and execution of financial instruments. And Jan is also on the board of Ektiyap, who is one of the leading impact investment platforms. I think, to my understanding, Jan, you were one of the architects of Turkey's first social impact bonds. We'll be very interested to hear your introductory.
Thank you, Johannes. It's hard to follow such an experienced speaker as Winnie's lead. But very quickly, you missed my most important title, which is I also am on Gülçin Salıngan's team together with you, and hoping to contribute to the valuable work that you do at UNDP. I'll try to, first, congratulations to the authors on the report. I think the report is as Winnie said, inspiring, and I think shows the path also for what else we need to do in order to address waste management. I'll try to approach it from an impact investment perspective and use of innovative financing instruments. The report makes it very clear that there have been some innovations, but we see that those innovations are limited to the use of bonds, essentially, green bonds, green sukuks, etc. And those are very large instruments for the most part, and not directly targeted at waste management, but in general towards green projects. But it's great that almost all of the countries have their green frameworks, which will allow them to issue further bonds. So that's groundwork is there for us to continue to push governments and private entities to further innovate. That's very interesting. Now, from an impact investor's perspective, why is waste management interesting? It's interesting for two main reasons. For us as an impact investor, we look for actually three attributes. One, that the purpose of the investment must be to solve an environmental or social problem. Here, that's very clear. The second one is that the impact should be measurable. Unlike in most social interventions, here the impact is very easy to measure, attribute, and report on. Third, profitability. And I think there is always room for efficiency in almost all services, where we can create a win-win situation where the private sector can generate profit while also saving money for the public sector. So from an impact perspective, the attractiveness is there. Now, from a commercial perspective, it's also an attractive area. And here, after our chat this morning, I remembered again this thing that I quote always: Y Combinator, the world's arguably the largest and the most successful accelerator, has identified 6 qualities of a good problem to solve. A good problem is a problem, the solution of which will generate revenues for you. And they've identified these 6 qualities, and they say if 2 of these 6 qualities exist in a problem you're trying to solve, then it's actually a commercially very attractive problem to solve. Now, I'll quickly say those 6 qualities, and you can think of waste management. First, the problem should be popular, experienced by many. So that's very clear. The problem should be frequent. We keep generating waste. We have to solve the problem again and again. Repeat customers. The problem should be growing. Aslan made the case of urbanization and the population growth, etc. It's growing. The solution is urgent. We need to solve it now, otherwise the problem gets worse. The absence of a solution is expensive, so people will pay for the solution. And 6, the solution is mandatory. To me, all these 6 qualities exist in waste management. So from a commercial perspective, it's also attractive. Then the other thing that I saw in the report, which is that most of the solutions, private sector-led solutions, are actually very large-scale solutions. But these problems can also be solved with entrepreneurial activity, with innovative approaches also. In most cases, especially in the global south, we see that entrepreneurial activity to some extent is limited because of access to difficulties in access to finance. And difficulties in access to finance is usually caused by one primary reason, in my view, in my experience, that is lack of exits. When we invest, we try to also see how and when am I going to be able to exit from this. And in the absence of clear exit paths, then you're not able to find investments to scale. So one of the things, maybe as the report is going further, maybe to look at what is holding back investment into innovative startups that may be able to solve these problems through different ways. Because waste management, again, I'll take a word from Vini's conversation this morning, that it's a problem of general interest. And it's a problem with multiple layers of impact, multiple layers of solutions that requires innovation from all the brilliant minds. And I think we as impact investors are ready to fuel that, but we need to provide the right structure, remove the barriers, help these entrepreneurs and investors invest in these solutions and scale them. I think I'm out of time. But one of the ways that we can look at this is it's also from an investor's perspective. It's a highly regulated market with very dominant players. So we might want to think about how can we open up this market to smaller players. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. I mean, it's many very pertinent points, and especially when it comes to these forms of sustainable finance, and you know, a lot of the frameworks do exist, and a lot of the innovation exists within the kind of the financial markets, but at the same time, specifically tailored products to waste management, I think is something that hasn't been incredibly prevalent, despite, you know, we can see from the report a number of private sector practices being being operational. So I think we'll make sure to have you back, and the same as Vinny for the Q&A. I also wanted to say to all the attendees, that, you know, the chat is open. Also, the Q&A should be accessible, so please feel free to send questions and keep the questions coming in. It'll be great. So, as the final panelist, I would like to introduce Aruna or Vineshwari Bolaki, who's just managed to catch us from flying in from Zambia. She's the Economic Affairs Officer for the UN Economic Commission for Africa and Sub-Regional Office for Southern Africa. Also, I guess the principal reason for her presence is she is the author of the South-South Ideas and South-South Cooperation Finance for Mobilization of the Private Sector to Achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, with a kind of professional interest in trade, regional integration, private sector, and South-South cooperation. So thank you very much for joining us, Aruna. I would like to give you the floor.
Thank you, Johannes. Greetings from Johannesburg, South Africa. Yes, the reason I'm on the panel is I had offered a paper looking more broadly at the question of how we can harness South-South development cooperation finance to mobilize the private sector into contributing to achieving the SDGs. So I feel that I have to apologize. I'm not an expert on waste management like my predecessors or on impact investing, but I hope that by sharing some insights from this paper, we can maybe broaden also the thinking. So first of all, I wish to congratulate UNDP for a very good piece that focuses on a specific SDG, SDG 12, right, contributing to sustainable cities, and also at highlighting all best practices coming from the private sector in the Global South. I think I'm just going to share I do have a presentation. I'm just going to share some insights from this paper. Is it visible, Johannes?
Yes.
It is, okay. So some insights from this paper, which I hope can complement what my two other panelists have just said. So it was a paper that was launched at the WTO in 2021, looking at the role of South-South cooperation finance to mobilize private sector to achieve the SDGs. So I think this piece from UNDP is an illustration of that, of how we can involve the private sector at a local level into contributing to achieve the SDGs. But I think you know, in what I want to say is, let me see whether I can move my slides. You know, it's a very, now that we are coming out of COVID and facing the Ukraine crisis, and the achievement of the SDGs is still a very important development priority for many countries, especially these developed countries. It's very important to understand on this UN South-South Cooperation Day what can be and what should be the role of South-South development cooperation in helping us to achieve the SDGs, including SDG 12 and others. There has been, you know, we know that the SDGs have been mainstream in many national development strategies of many developing countries from the South. But there's a need for massive investment in many sectors, of which waste management is just one. There's a need for massive investment in many sectors for a prolonged period of time. So we know, for instance, that the average SDG financing gap per year for the 59 low-income developing countries is about $400 billion between now and 2030. So in that paper, the argument was that we need to go back and put the spotlight on SDG 17 and the 19 targets, and especially within SDG 17, we need to target more specifically looking at how we can mobilize multi-stakeholder partnerships at international and national level for financial resources, namely SDG 17.16 and 17.17. And when you look at these two targets together, it really speaks to how we can mobilize South-South partnerships and especially enhance the role of the private sector in these partnerships. So this is how I think this piece from UNDP put a spotlight on this issue of how to mobilize South-South partnerships, how to enhance the role of a private sector within these South-South partnerships. And the UNDP piece is very good. But when we read the report, I wish we could perhaps see a bit more analysis on how to harness South-South development finance in order to address this issue of waste management at a local level. Now, like for instance, I want to speak from an African context, coming from ECA. When we look at many African countries, and when we look at, for instance, their the voluntary national reviews that they prepare, where in which, in New York, they have to present their voluntary national reviews, explaining how they are contributing to the SDGs. You may be surprised to see that in many African countries, there is very little reference to South-South Development Cooperation, on how they are leveraging on South-South Development Cooperation to achieve the SDGs, and even less on how they are involving the local private sector to achieve the SDGs at a national level. So at least for the African region, I think what we note is that we need more mechanism and instruments on to harness South-South Development Cooperation to finance the SDGs, and also we need also to help these countries to think of how they are going to involve the private sector in this process. So, I'm not going to be long.
Apologies,
because
Aruna. I'm just giving you this 1 minute warning. Thank you.
Yes. So basically, I think the message that we want to convey out there is that, and this is the message of this key paper, is that we need to harness more South-South development cooperation, trade and finance in order to build capabilities of a local private sector in many countries. So for instance, in many African countries, if in the waste sector, there is little involvement of the private sector because the private sector finds it hard to be profitable. So the angle that I want to bring to this panel is to see how can we harness South-South Development Cooperation to build capabilities of the local private sector in the first place. Not only to engage them in the achievement of the SDGs, but how to build their capabilities and what should be the role of the South-South Development Cooperation. Well, over to you, Johannes. I think this was more to kind of suscitate a bit of the debate. We are talking about waste management, which is a critical issue. Where I live in Zambia, next to where I live, there's an open landfill where my neighbors burn their waste every now and then. And it is a negative externality. But what I want to say is that in many countries, I mean, in your case studies, you're looking at countries like Morocco and Tunisia, but in many poor countries, this issue of waste management, of how to involve the local private sector and how to help them be profitable, maybe we can also think of how we can harness South-South development finance to make this
sector for an excellent presentation. And yeah, I wanted to please, it would be great to keep you on the panel, and if Jan and then you could open their camera also to. And perhaps also the authors and other panelists. If we could essentially, I have a few questions, and it'd be great to hear also from further expertise. I'm not sure we have many questions, but I think I would like to specifically hear from Veni first in terms of, the depth of your waste management experience. Where would you see the opportunities for kind of, all the successes of private sector initiatives from other countries, and how they've been integrated, and perhaps some of the challenges around the integration of a private sector waste management solutions. Oh, Veni, you're on mute.
I think the most important thing would be to try to understand the context, how a specific project was developed, why it was developed the way it was, because then it's more easier to replicate it and use it in another context, in another country. And therefore, I think we need more information with respect to this report. I find it also very interesting about the idea from Jan to think about how can we introduce more SME, smaller entities in these activities. I think that can also be a way forward, very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Veni. And I was also maybe a question for Jan, and I think we touched upon this briefly this morning, is around the kind of innovative financing and how perhaps frequently they are municipal led, and what kind of the outcomes or if you're designing or if you're executing these forms of innovative finance specifically around municipalities, how does that differ, and are there any better or worse outcomes?
Oh, very good question. I think when we think about impact investing and investors, we always think of it as one type of investing and one type of investors. But we need to look at the problem that we're trying to solve and design fit-for-purpose structures. In that, one of the ways that we look at it is, we look at a problem and we say, who creates the problem? Who suffers from the problem? Who benefits from the problem, and who would benefit from the solutions directly and indirectly. And all of that then tells us who might pay for the solution of the problem. Notice in the first three, there is nothing about payment. It's just who creates, who suffers, who benefits from it. But then when it comes to owning the problem and paying for it, then there is always, an issue. But if we can show the value to all of these parties, your suffering will decrease, your benefits will increase, and you are creating the problem, you're guilty for it, then we have a way to justify payments and create different revenue streams. And through that, we can actually structure fit-for-purpose approaches to these different problems. In everything we do, I think impact investing is always seen as, wait, this is a public problem. Why are we outsourcing it to the private sector and letting them profit out of this public problem? But that's a very shallow way of looking at it. Private sector brings a lot of efficiencies to the problem, new solutions, they save time, they save money, etc. And we need to contrast this against what would it have cost the public sector and the general population. So there is always a saving on the public side as well. Outcomes-based contracts are one of the easiest instruments that we see around this. And I'll share in the chat now from Oxford University's Government Outcomes Lab that there have been a number of attempts around the world, both in the North and the Global South, where a lot of lessons have been learned. And I think it was in your comments or Rini's comments that we need to think really in a tailored way and learn, and the design of the instrument and the approach is very critical, because that tells us what we're incentivizing, and then that will actually tell from the get-go whether we're going to reach our solutions, our goals or not. So we need to be very careful about what we're incentivizing and what are also the risk factors that we're building in that we can mitigate for this. Now, just one maybe quick approach, what impact investing brings, as opposed to a straight contracting or a procurement of services for waste management, is that we are contracting with an investor and we're telling them, you solve this problem. I don't know how, I don't know, what you're going to use, but I will pay you when and if you solve the problem. I will pay you for the results, not for the process. So we define the outcomes that we're targeting, and we leave the investor with that room for flexibility and entrepreneurial approach. That is critical. That's what we're getting actually by engaging impact investors instead of procuring services from a delivery partner. We're not just getting their money, but we're getting their appetite for risk, their entrepreneurial approach, and their innovation. I don't know if that was a very long answer, but I hope I answered your question.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I think we are going into the last element. So maybe I'll have one short question. Maybe Aruna, if you could maybe respond in 1 or 2 minutes before we hand over to Xiaofang for the closing remarks. But essentially, reading your report about South-South kind of cooperation and finance, it'd be interesting to understand which countries provide the most opportunities, because I know you mentioned China, and that's also the slight criticism of South-South cooperation not always leading to better development goals. It'd be interesting to hear how that landscape looks like on a South-South cooperation landscape.
Thank you, Johannes. Yes, I think one the insights that we want to bring, I'm speaking more at a policy level, not zeroing in on waste management. But I think going forward is that, for instance, in the African context, when you look at South-South development cooperation, there's a lot of interest, for instance, from countries like China in the commodities sector in African countries. And what we want is to also diversify South-South finance into new sectors. And now this piece on waste management is a reminder that even developing countries and poor countries need now to accelerate the transition towards a circular economy, the transition towards a green economy, and therefore what should be the role of big South-South investors like China and India and Brazil in this process. And not only having an interest in larger scale infrastructure projects, but also sharing experiences among global southern countries on how to come up with innovative solutions at a local level and really build this transition towards a green economy and integrate circular economy concepts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Varuna. So before I hand over, I just want a very brief question also to Juliana that I believe Veni had posed. Juliana, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just 30 seconds on the question that was asked about the report and the challenge of replicating these good practices. Indeed, part of the methodology that we used when we were selecting at the very beginning the cities to focus on, it was not only the technical experiences from the waste management perspective, but also the political will of these countries, the countries from those cities to engage in South-South cooperation and share their knowledge. You know, it's not a given. I mean, but some countries are heavily engaged in South-South cooperation and willing to share these good practices with others. So we also looked into that factor as well when selecting. And we wanted to also have geographical representation from all continents as well. So the idea was basically to say, okay, these countries came up with successful good practices, which are not perfect. Indeed, in the report, we also highlighted some of the challenges in these good practices. Although they were successful, there were some challenges, but also to say these are countries that are willing to share these good practices. Replicability is never exact, and we know that because everything has to be adapted to the respective contexts and differences. But coming back to the beginning of the webinar, the idea was that this serves as inspiration. It serves as inspiration to say, these are some good practices, which are not perfect. So if something rings a bell, these are the cities that you can connect with, and we can help you to connect with, perhaps to learn more and see what you can take from it and apply in your territories. So I just wanted to quickly comment on that. Let me stop now and move to the closing remarks. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Juliana, for providing that context and the slightly bigger picture element of the report. So without any further ado, I know we're running out of time. I would like to introduce Jiofan Zhu, who is the Director of the Chemicals and Waste Hub at UNDP. Please, the closing remarks, the floor are yours.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank all of the colleagues here for the very interesting discussion and also share your insights and for your hard work of the UNDP colleague, in the South-South team and also the private sector team, to take time to, discuss with those countries, cities, and collect the data and, combining that into a interesting report that people can look at all of those opportunities, challenge, and, solutions. I think that's a very useful report. And I think that's very interesting that they also in the report also include some very interesting like green financing mechanism, some initiative in the country and in the city, and also some good practice from private sector. So I think that's something we should be proud of. And I thank you very much to take on this very complicated issue of waste management. We also learn and listened from our expert and from panelists about their insight about how to address those challenges on the waste management. That's a big question, big issue. And as UNDP, we are trying to support developing countries and also particularly the local government, like city, municipality level, to move to a new direction. It's different with the past practice. The new direction is zero waste, zero pollution vision. It's not so easy, everybody understand, but that's something we should aiming for and align this vision with other, target like, a climate, neutral those kind of, big picture, but also with SDG. And we also believe this zero waste vision is feasible. There are some good practice in the world. Some cities already very close to that target. There are many good experience we can learn from that. And particularly in recent years from Global South, many countries already, did a lot of work towards this region. Many cities participate in the Zero Waste City, initiative, including, some cities supported by UNDP in our program. And we really can, based on this long-term strategy, long-term vision to develop the waste management strategy at city level and country level, and put this policy, finance solution instrument, the public-private partnership, and also the awareness, education, put all of those together and work out a new, we towards a new world, a new economy, and we are also see the circular economy, it will be the future. So I think this kind of discussion and initiative are very helpful. And as UNDP Chemical and Waste Hub, we are now develop a zero waste vision offer. And we also support from across all of our program for circular economy. And we try to share the experience, and particularly South, there are many countries have the same, circumstance, context, has same challenge. And I think that could be something we will really, try our best to support. And this kind of network between South and sometimes also some, learning from the North, I think all are important. So I think I thank you, all of you, to participate in this webinar, and we will have maybe similar topic on the chemical and waste, circularity, and also plastic, some series of webinar. We hope that you will continue to support and contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fan, for those closing remarks. And with that, I would like to thank all the panelists and all the attendees, and good morning, and good. I hope you have a lovely day and or a lovely evening to wherever you're joining. And it's been a great pleasure and an amazing learning experience from kind of depth of expertise. And hopefully this you can also bring forward. So for all those that are working on project design, program design, hopefully then we can use this information to start implementing or designing projects that can facilitate kind of private sector initiatives or solutions for waste management. So thank you very much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you for the amazing moderation.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.